I went to college in a historic mid-sized city in Florida, and at the time lived in a duplex downtown, maybe 3 blocks from campus. The city is known to be pretty safe, and I lived in a pretty decent area with large historic homes near me. This story takes place around 6 years ago, and for context, I'm female. A little backstory that will become relevant. The duplex I lived in had a front door that locked, and then both the upstairs and downstairs units had their own locking door. I lived downstairs and had 2 roommates, but this specific night only one of my roommates was home. We knew the girls that lived upstairs, but only really spoke to them in passing. When they moved in, we emphasized how important it was to us for them to keep the main front door locked, and they did a good job of doing so. So me and my roommate are in for the night, knowing the front door is locked. At some point, we hear a knock at the door and quickly realize the girls upstairs had ordered a pizza. Later on, it became evident that they never locked the front door after receiving their pizza. So we finally go to sleep in our own rooms, and since I had a queen bed, I would often sleep with my phone and laptop next to me in my bed. A couple hours after I fell asleep, I woke up to a man standing over my bed. As soon as I realize I'm not dreaming, I notice that he is quickly moving my phone and computer off of my bed and moving my comforter, trying to get into my bed. I start to ask him who he is and what he's doing here, and just generally confused. The only thing he said to me multiple times was that he was, quote, just trying to get in bed. At this point I began to panic, as my mind obviously goes to the worst. I was hoping that maybe my roommate had invited some random Tinder guy over and that he had gone into the wrong room. But the more I questioned him, all he had to say was, I'm just trying to get in bed. I own pepper spray and a stun gun, but I had accidentally left them on the shelf that the guy was standing in front of, so there was no way I would be able to grab them without escalating the situation. Realizing I needed to do something quickly, I blurted, there are 5 people who live in this house, and if you don't get the hell out now, I will scream and they'll all be here within seconds. Luckily, that was all it took to scare him off. I don't know if he had brought something with him or if he stole something from me, but I saw him grab something in the dark and run out of my room. As soon as he left my room, I shut the door and locked it and tried to find my phone. I couldn't find it anywhere, but then quickly realized that between my room and the front door is the room of my friend that was home. As scared as I was terrified that the guy had maybe gone into her room, so I grabbed my stun gun and pocket knife, counted to 3, and ripped open my door. I ran into my roommate's room, and she was fast asleep, and there was no evidence of the guy. I told her what had happened, and she asked me if I was sure I wasn't dreaming. I began to question myself, until I walked out of her room and saw that our front door was wide open. I went to my room to search for my phone, and finally find it hidden under a pile of clothes across the room from where I had left it. That sent a chill up my spine, as I immediately knew for a fact that someone had been in my house and in my room while I was sleeping, and long enough to hide my phone, which only worsened my suspicions of his intentions. I ran back to my roommate's room, who at that point believed me, barricaded ourselves into the room and called 911. Within minutes, there were police cars swarming our street and yard, and they yelled for us to quickly leave the residence and run towards them. At least a dozen police officers came running in and searched every inch of our apartment, and woke up the girls upstairs and searched their apartment to ensure the man had left. The officers then had me write a statement, and I gave them a description of the man, and to this day, I've never heard a single thing about the case. I feel incredibly lucky with the outcome of the situation, but the thought of his intentions terrifies me, and additionally, the fact that he was never caught scares me, as I would hate for anyone to have to go through the pure fear that I did. I will add that there's a chance that he was on drugs or mentally ill and had no bad intentions. However, because he was never caught, I will never know, and my mind will always assume the worst. To the man who now keeps me up at night, let's not meet. This is the first time I've shared this story. So me and a few of my friends were having a sleepover on a casual Friday. We all came to my friend's house right after school and planned to stay there overnight twice into Sunday. Now, whenever my friends and I would sleep over at this friend's house, let's call him Zach, he would play hide and seek in the woods behind his house. We were always in teams of 2, and there were usually 6 or 7 of us. On this night, there were 6, so we had 2 seekers and 4 hiders. Me and my friend Zach teamed up. I had the flashlight, he had the phone. This took place in the Christina Lake area. So we go outside and start the game. Zach and I are hiding behind this really thick tree about a half-mile away from his house. We hear shouting in the distance and just assume it was our friends being caught by the seekers. Soon enough, we hear footsteps and lots of people talking. My first instinct is to turn off the flashlight and stay hidden. The mutters are becoming louder, and so are the footsteps. Now we assume that our friends are getting nearer, but we don't recognize their voices. Now they're right on top of us, like maybe 7 feet away, and me and my friend are still being as quiet as possible. It's pitch black due to fall in Canada. My friend Zach says, "I'm gonna try and get a look," and basically makes as much noise as humanly possible. I just started going for it. Zach and I dash from behind the tree we were using as cover and hear, "Go get them," from behind us. I don't even turn on the flashlight. I'm just jumping every time I see something darker than the shades of the rest of the forest. Zach gets cut off by some other members and darts right off the trail he was on. I'm still gunning it towards his house and hear footsteps coming up behind me. I jumped off my trail and slid down the fallen leaves, making a bunch of noise, but somehow losing the guy that was coming after me. I jumped behind a fallen log and cut my leg open on the branch. I held my breath, trying to make as little noise as possible. The guy yells, "Son of a bitch, I'm gonna find you, you little whore." Me being a 12-year-old male took no offense to this. He turned his back, and as I sprinted towards the house, I noticed my friends with the basement hatch open and they saw me, then the guy. I made a jump and landed in the basement hatch and tumbled down the stairs, shut the door just in time. He didn't bother trying to get in. Turns out my other 4 friends saw these guys and ran back towards Zach's house. Not even 5 minutes later, Zach was pounding on the door and we let him in. I was once driving through the Canadian Rockies late at night and had just passed through a small town. So I'm driving through the pitch black and I need to stop to pee and have a smoke. But because it's so dark, I miss the last rest stop for the next while. No problem, the highway is completely deserted. So I pull to the side of the road, have my pee while staring out into the dark, and then lit up a cigarette and stand by my car. As I'm standing there, I see a figure of a man just walking out of the tree line. I'm miles from civilization, patchy cell service, and there isn't a soul on the road. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me and maybe it was a deer, but nope, this was a man. So I calmly walk back to the driver's side door and get in, locking the doors behind me. I'm keeping my eye on this guy as I nervously smoke and have my car in drive ready to peel out, but for some reason, I just stayed put. The guy walks right up to my passenger door and knocks on the window. I crack the window and I ask what's up. He replies to me in a very, very serious tone. "I need you to call the cops." I cautiously ask why, and he tells me that he had gone out into the woods to end his life, but couldn't go through with it because he had thoughts of his daughters right before he was about to do it. I call the cops while the guy quietly cries outside. He had a kitchen knife and he was going to use it on himself. So I stayed in the car and advised him to maybe leave the knife on the ground before the cops arrived. The cops came and got him, but before they left with him, I gave him a solid heart-to-heart and wished him well. I still think about him. I hope he was able to turn things around. I just want to take this moment to say that I hope you're all doing well. If you're not, then please remember that no feeling is final, How you're feeling is not definitive and won't feel that way for the rest of your life, nor are you defined by those feelings. Feelings of dread or despair are just where you are, not who you are. There is a tomorrow, and whatever you're going through cannot take that away from you. You're so much stronger than you know or give yourself credit for, so whatever you're facing, you can get through it. It was early July. I was about to begin my senior year of college, but home for the summer. While at home, I met Lisa on Tinder. Lisa lived in the same town as my college and invited me to stay with her for the weekend. I happily obliged. That booty. The weekend with Lisa went great. We started dating a couple of weeks later. It's now late July or early August 2012. My housing for the upcoming year was going to be in our fraternity housing off campus. We had a main house called the Big House and a smaller house in the backyard, the Little House. I needed to clean up the little house I was going to be moving into since it was left filthy by the previous tenants. Lisa offered to help, so we spent most of our time there. The little house was stockpiled with furniture that people had left for the summer instead of taking it home. There were probably 6 or 7 couches stuffed in a tiny living room, so you literally had to hop from one to the other to navigate the room. We made a game of it, and made great use of them throughout the weekend. Sorry. To give you an idea of the layout, the little house was a ranch-style brick home with 3 adjacent bedrooms at the back of the house and a kitchen and living room at the front. The front door entered directly into the living room. The side door, if entering the home, was off to the right on the far side of the kitchen. In the living room was one large 6 by 8 foot glass window covered with blackout curtains at the front of the house. Here's a photo if you're just standing inside the front door. The kitchen is to your back. The lighting from the front window is visible on the left, just beyond the closet. Okay, so here's the story. It's late, probably around 11 p.m. Lisa and I were tuckered out, and we cuddled up on one of the couches to watch the London Olympics. She dozes off, head on my chest, and I'm left there happily pinned down. Suddenly, the front doorknob starts to shake. I'm caught off guard because it's summer in an empty college town, and we aren't expecting anyone. It stops for a moment. The doorknob shakes more violently this time. Thankfully, it's locked. As I prepare to slide out from under Lisa to investigate, 3 loud bangs against the door as if someone was trying to kick it in. Their attempt to enter has failed. Phew. I'm partially relieved, but still aware that there are 2 other doors where they could enter. Lisa's awake now, delirious and frantic. "What's going on? What was that?" she yelled. I hushed her and told her to get up and go to the back of the house, into a bedroom and lock the door until I personally came to get her. She refused. I demanded. She obliged and scurried her way across the couches and locked herself in the back bedroom. I run to the far side of the kitchen and make sure the side door is locked. It is. Back door? Locked as well. Okay, we're alright. For now. I'm thinking to myself, weapon? What can I use? Crap, I wish I had a gun. Maybe the brothers left something. Shotgun would be ideal. I see a hunting bow with a full quiver and arrows. No, too cumbersome. Keep looking. Golf club, 6-iron. Perfect. Everything is silent, aside from my pounding heartbeat and the faint sound of Lisa calling the cops from the back room. I'm standing in the kitchen, so I have a full view of both the front door and the side door, white-knuckling this golf club, when suddenly the side doorknob starts shaking, and there's a couple of bangs on that door. Lisa screams from the back of the house, and I yell to the intruder, "We're in here and we called the cops. They'll be here any second. Leave us alone." The banging stops. It's silent. Dead silent. We wait for the cops to come. Lisa and I are back in the living room on the couch. 2 full hours pass. It's now something like 2:30 a.m., and there's still no sign of the cops. I'm both exhausted from the adrenaline crash and angry that the cops haven't come. We call them again. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, yeah, we called 2 hours ago to report an intruder, but no cops ever came. Are you still in the home? Did the intruder make it inside? Yeah, we're still inside. They didn't get in, but I'm scared they're going to come back. What's your address? I'll have an officer go over and check out the area. Thank you. The address is 123. As I'm literally spelling out the address, the front door is getting slammed or kicked again. I holler to the 911 operator. They're back. Please help. Hurry. Officers are on their way. Stay on the phone. Keep away from windows and doors. Lisa is freaking out. I'm freaking out, wielding the golf club again. And suddenly, the entire front window, all 6 by 8 feet, shatters to pieces. The glass is mostly contained by the blackout curtains, and I screamed the girliest, most blood-curdling scream I can imagine. I stood up and started swinging the golf club wildly, hoping to make contact with whatever or whoever was coming into the house. Moments later we hear sirens, and I can faintly see blue light swirling outside through the split in the curtains. A megaphone announces the police presence. They scour the area and eventually knock on the door. Apparently, someone did try to kick in both doors, and there were boot prints to prove it. The window was shattered with a malt liquor bottle. They ended up finding a drunkard from the trailer park nearby who had been roaming the area. I bought a gun the next day. This happened to me a while back when I decided to go on a camping trip alone. I always liked camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear and my rifle for protection, and jumped into my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15 to 20 miles in until I find the right spot and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumble upon a nice-sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent to the southernmost edge of the clearing, next to the tree line, and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance underneath all the forest noise. It sounds like an animal, most likely a deer with a lame leg, as it sounded like the animal was making a walking, dragging noise. I feel bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away, and it was getting dark, so I couldn't really go and put it out of its misery. I think nothing of it after that, and go about eating my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag. I decide that even at my exhausted and relaxed state, I can't go to sleep, so I pull out a book I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by, and I hear that sound again, this time closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listen to this animal drag across the clearing towards my tent. It's really loud at this point, and it sounds like the hooves are being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after, like the deer is dragging something along. It makes it to about what I assume is the middle of the clearing and stops, and I hear nothing. No breathing. I mean, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing. Nothing but trees and darkness. What the hell? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for other noises. Nothing, just crickets and the breeze. I decide that there are a lot of strange noises in the woods and tried not to let it bother me. Besides, I had my rifle. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then woman's laughter and sticks snapping far off to my left. I'm up now, wondering if what I'm hearing is really what I'm hearing or just a product of being half asleep. I hear more faint laughing from a couple of other different directions, all different, i.e. men, old women, even children, and confirm that it's real. The noises are closing in, and I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot off in the air in case they came too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night told me that this was not just another family strolling through. I was on edge already, but then I noticed the nightlife was dead quiet. Not even the wind was making any noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line, saw nothing, listened intensely to my surroundings. No laughing, and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit and figuring that scared whoever off, I sat down, and in my exhausted state I fell asleep. I wake up in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering not too far from my tent. Alert, grab my rifle and listen to what they're saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent. I shout again, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly, a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, illuminating several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my rifle, blowing a hole in the front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up and sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was. I hiked until sunrise back to my truck, with my head over my shoulder the entire way. Never heard anyone follow me, never saw anyone or anything the whole way, but couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me like I left all my gear in the woods that night. My uncle has lived in Russia for more than 2 decades. From time to time, I used to travel there for holidays since my early childhood. He lived in a rural area, not too far from the city of Moscow. He held a small farm, cows, pigs, chickens and such. I was 19 when I went to Uncle for the summer break. Since I was old enough to help him around the place, and I had a driving license, Uncle asked me to get into a truck and take hay back to the farm from the plot of land that he used to grow, so he had hay ready for winter. He had to keep feeding 2 cows, and without hay, it'd almost be impossible to keep cattle in the winter. I'd have to make a few trips to drive all stacks of hay from the plot to home, but as a motivation, Uncle promised to let me borrow his car for a night out with friends. We made a deal, and the first trip came and went without any incidents. It wasn't a big distance between the plot and the farm. It would be 25 to 27 kilometers maybe, but loading and unloading the truck took a long time. So by the time of the second trip, it was already well past sunset. I was driving the truck back to the farm, full of another load of hay, when suddenly on the road appeared a man. He was smiling and holding up a 1,000-ruble bill in hopes of catching a ride. You ever get the feeling when something is out of place, but you can't quite put your finger on it? I had that weird feeling and decided to play safe and fair. I didn't stop and continued my journey back to my uncle's farm. I felt a bit guilty for leaving that man there, but in my defense, I was a 19-year-old girl driving a car that wasn't even mine and loaded with tons of hay, which costs quite a bit of money. I didn't want to risk not only getting hijacked, but also maybe something worse, which, sure enough, I calmed my conscience and in a few minutes forgot the encounter entirely. Not long after, I heard a weird noise coming from the backside of the truck. Something was hitting against the truck bed door, and I got scared that I might have thrown all the hay without knowing it. I stopped the car and got out, looked back, checked the door and latches, and crawled under, but everything seemed fine. I shrugged and returned back to the cabin. I was about to open the door and get inside when I saw that old man sitting in the cabin of the truck, smiling at me and holding out the 1,000-ruble bill. I didn't even hear him opening or closing the doors. I almost fell back from sheer shock. How the hell? When? Why? I had 1,000 questions lining up in my head. How this dude got in there? How he caught up? Why was he sitting in my uncle's truck? I yelled at him to get the hell out of the truck, but the old man was just sitting there, smiling and holding out the damn bill. I yelled at him, threatened, but nothing. And standing there outside my truck, holding the doorknob of the driver's side, I realized that I'm scared to death of that man. Luckily for me, I saw the lights of another truck coming my way. I leaned out all the way, holding myself with the doorknob, and started waving my hand. While the truck was getting closer, I was thinking to myself that I'd give this creepy old fart a ride for his life, with that bill far up his guts. The truck was almost here, and I decided to look into the cabin of my truck and saw him now scooted over to the driver's seat, face stuck to the window and staring at me. I fell over and landed on my ass from fright. Then I heard the doors of my truck open from the passenger side and scrambled to my feet. The dude walked over. He was still smiling and holding out the bill. Only then I noticed what he held in his other hand, a small kitchen hatchet. This wasn't fun and games anymore. I backed away, and just in that moment, the truck arrived and stopped right beside me. The man that stopped before me turned and dashed into the forest away from the road. The driver of the other truck looked over and asked what was wrong. I just yelled, "There's a man with 1,000-ruble bill and kitchen hatchet here." Dude didn't even get out. He locked his doors and ordered me to do the same. Jumping back into my truck, I locked the doors and waited for a while with the other driver. What we were waiting for, I don't know. Maybe to see him again, to wait and see if he'd turn up again. 10 minutes went, and the driver of the truck decided it was safe enough now to get out of the cars. We got out, shook hands and lit cigarettes. I told him what had happened from the beginning, while I smoked like crazy. The driver was nodding along and looking around, seemingly looking for some movement from the side of the forest. Butting cigarettes, he advised me to never stop the car no matter what, and especially if going at night. He was a long-haul driver and seemingly speaking from experience, so I agreed, and bidding goodbye, we got into our own separate trucks and parted ways. When I got to the farm, I informed my aunt about what had happened, and as I expected, she started freaking out. She called my uncle immediately and explained everything, and soon enough, the neighbor boy that was helping all day to unload the truck here in the farm took the keys and drove back to my uncle himself. And to be honest, I was happy that he relieved me of my duty. I was thinking all night about how that guy caught up with me. I wasn't speeding, but wasn't crawling either. My only guess was that he ran after my truck and somehow jumped on the back door. He held up for a while, and then started to make noises so I'd stop and get out and investigate, which is how it exactly happened. Why was he doing all this? I can only guess. I never saw that man ever since, and to this day, I have no idea what it was all about, or what would have happened if not for some random driver in the right place at the right time. Thankfully, I didn't have a chance to find out. Thank you, driver, for amazing timing. And as for the old man with his stupid bill and hatchet, let's never meet again. Do you know those silly school trips that last a few days? I used to go on as many of those as I could. I loved them. It was always fun to choose your roommates and decide who went on what bed, etc. I would have been about 12 or 13 at the time of this story, everyone else being involved around the same age. This school trip was meant to be like any other. It was for my English class, and it was about a certain author that we were studying. The day started normally. We got off of our coach and went to our designated rooms. In the room was a shower and toilet and 4 bunk beds. One was closer to the door and the second was parallel to it on the opposite side of the room. I was on the bottom bunk. My friend Rosa was on the bunk above me. My other friends, Eloise and Noelle, were on the other bunks. Eloise was on the bottom and Noelle was on the top. To get into our room, you had to go up 2 flights of stairs and into a little foyer area. From there, you had a door directly to the left of the foyer entrance. Go through that door and there were 2 more doors, one to the left and one straight forward, the one directly in front of ours. It's important to note that some friends of ours were in the room to the left. We were allowed to go out in small groups in the village or town area, as long as we told a teacher. I remember my room and the room next to us went out to grab some snacks and food, as we would not be having food until the next morning. As our room was bigger, we all went there to enjoy our masterful feast. It must have been around 6 p.m, maybe a little later. Our school was very friendly. Everyone knew pretty much everyone, so we would have a set time that we would all go down and talk and socialize, play snooker, watch Love Island with subtitles, or just generally chill out. Our teachers would join in as well. It was so fun. We would usually go up to our rooms around 10 or 11 p.m. That night, we went up at 10. My roommates and I stayed up for a while, talking and sharing sweets around. The rooms next door didn't have a toilet, and they were worried about what they could do, so we decided that instead of being smart and just giving them our room key and taking it back in the morning, that we would keep the door unlocked for them. I'm pretty sure I fell asleep at around midnight, after everyone else had fallen asleep. I woke up a short while later, completely knackered and half asleep. I'm a light sleeper, so when I heard the door click shut, I immediately woke up. I assumed it was one of the girls next door coming to use the toilet, but it wasn't. I heard low grunting, which confused my still asleep brain to no end, but I concluded it was one of the male teachers who just forgot to check up on everyone. It's not that uncommon. What I didn't expect was the dude to come over and sit on the edge of my bed, as if he was getting ready to get in. He sat on my foot, and I guess he felt it, because he stood back up and put his hands on the end bars of the ladders to both of the bunks, I assume trying to stay standing up. For some reason, I still thought it was a teacher, but I was starting to wake up a little at this point, starting to take in the situation. I heard him say, "This is not my room, it's a room with girls in it," and I just replied, "Yes, it is." It was weird. It wasn't a question, and he didn't sound confused or embarrassed. He stated he was in the room full of young girls. He knew where he was. I'm pretty sure he purposefully looked for a girl's room. He also didn't speak like a normal human being. Looking back, why on earth was I not freaking out? I have no idea. Note that this is only the first night. A lot of crazy things happened on that trip, some which will haunt me forever. Always lock your doors no matter what. Be smart, be safe, and remember, if something happens to you, especially if someone does something to you, it's never your fault. You're not alone. Anyway, I heard slight shuffling and the door click shut again. That's when it clicked for me. There was an unknown man in our room. I talked to him. I bolted up into a sitting position and quietly slipped out of bed, grabbing our room key off the coat hook we put it on. Then I saw legs. I would have screamed if I wasn't so stunned. Scared and tired, I scrambled back into my bed. That's when Rosa woke up. She was incredibly tired, and I was on the verge of a panic attack. I got up off of my bed so she could see and just pointed at the legs. When she saw them, she went wide-eyed and looked like she would join me in my panic attack. We started whispering, trying to figure out what to do. Then Noelle woke up, asking us to be quiet as she was trying to sleep. So Rosa broke the news that we probably wouldn't be sleeping properly at all that night. Noelle didn't believe us at first, so I tiptoed over to her and showed her the legs. And then it hit both of us. He was naked. There was a nude man in our room, unconscious for all we knew, just in the front of the door, blocking the only escape route from the room. So far, it wasn't looking too great. I went over to Eloise and shook her awake. She scared us half to death with how loud she sounded. We were terrified that the man had come into our room with bad intentions and was either pretending to be unconscious so that we would go near him, or that he had somehow managed to knock himself out. But if we went near him, he might wake up. I got Eloise to calm down, and Rosa once again explained as I started to break down. The other girls close behind me in my distress, we got out our phones and started calling every friend or contact that was on the trip with us, desperately hoping they were awake so that they could come save us. But sometimes you have to be your own hero. We were trying to stay calm and figure out a plan when Noelle was able to reach Dad on the phone. He gave us some advice about how to handle the situation, but ultimately told us to get out and find someone to help us. Remember that the man was in the entryway, blocking the door with his head. It felt like we were trapped, but we decided to just do it. If it went wrong, we would just hit him on the head with the door. Simple. Noelle went first, followed by Eloise, then me and Rosa. The door was only open a crack, so we had to move quickly and quietly, trying to fit through the crack as best we could. Otherwise, we ran the risk of hitting him and waking him up. I'm fairly certain Rosa hit him on the head, just to spite him. I wish I had the confidence to do that. We went through both of the doors and out into the open foyer area. At the left end of the area was one of the male teachers' rooms. I remember frantically knocking on the door, still being careful to not wake the man or anyone else up. But no teacher answered, so we kind of just stood there in the middle of the open area, freaking out, crying ourselves a river. Looking back, I feel kind of stupid, but I can't change the past. Then, all of the teachers on the trip came out of the corridor, talking quietly. Obviously seeing us sobbing, seeing me and Noelle collapsed on the floor in a breakdown was not what they had expected to see that night. Apparently, the man had been walking around most of the rooms, trying the door handles, knocking on the doors, and trying to get in. My male teachers had caught him and taken him downstairs. At that point, he had a bedrobe on. The teachers had gone to one of their rooms to figure out what they should do. Since we were underage and part of a school, they had to call the police. We had to stay up and wait for the police to arrive. We had to go over to a separate area where the female teachers' rooms were and calm down over there. Can I just say that the lady who told us to be quiet because she and her husband wanted to spend some quality time together and we were disturbing their peace? Screw you. We were traumatized 12-year-olds. When the police arrived, they took the man downstairs and we were asked some questions and we asked questions in return. The police told us that the man wasn't drunk nor on drugs. He had no reason to be there. They had no idea what his intentions were and what he was doing that night. He was kicked out of the hotel and is never allowed back there. But nevertheless, it was quite creepy, and I wish to never see him again. To start off, I live in a little city in Southern California with my roommate, who happens to be my cousin. During the coronavirus pandemic, however, I've been staying with my parents, who live in a very small town in North California. Because of my time where I live, I really don't like staying with them, and I would rather live back in my apartment. The reason why I haven't done it is because my parents think I'll get very lonely there since everything is closed down, and my roommate is not there as he's also with his parents. However, since I had to go back for a specific reason, my parents wanted me to take their dog, Mocha, so I wouldn't feel as lonely staying there. I loved her, so I didn't mind one bit. Mocha is a small Pomchi dog that loves to play around me and is usually by my side for most of the time. She also loves to go on runs with me, so I occasionally do take her on jogs. On a Wednesday night, I decided to go running with her. Whenever I go on any runs, I go at night because that's the time I'm most energetic, and all the times I went running at night, I never had any type of encounters or occurrences. I put Mocha on a leash, and off we went. About 20 minutes into our run, I was running through this creek area where there was a park next to it, and a bunch of trees surrounding it, houses to the other side. The trail was pretty narrow, and the street lamps were pretty dim, but still bright enough to see up ahead. As I'm running with music playing, my leash was tugged by Mocha. This usually happens when she wants to go to the bathroom, so I stopped to let her do her thing, but when I turned around, she was in her alert stance, looking straight behind where we ran. I assumed that she had heard a squirrel or any small animal, as she usually does this when she sees one. I was tugging her leash, telling her, "Let's go, there's nothing there." She didn't oblige at first. She just kept looking behind us. It took me about 4 to 5 tugs before she finally came to me. I resumed playing my music, and we both went off running. I was almost out of the creek, and then I would meet a narrow sidewalk that was straight ahead. The trail only had to take a short turn. Probably a minute or two later, Mocha tugged the leash again and went on her alert stance behind us. She did an aggressive bark and started growling. I stopped and was looking all around behind us. I was kind of freaked out because the trail had a couple of turns and curves. This meant that something was most likely following us. My first guess was a lost dog, which was unsettling because Mocha is tiny. If it was a big dog, it could easily overpower her. As I was looking around the dim area, for a split second, I got a black humanoid figure about 15 yards away from me, right behind a bush next to a tree. I immediately turned my eyes to the opposite direction and pretended that I did not see him, but boy, my heart was pounding. I didn't see any figures or his face. I just saw the outline of his upper body. I didn't have any weapons on me as self-defense. If this guy's following me, my best solution is to run off without him trying to catch me. I tried to act cool and told Mocha, "Let's go." The trail was going to end. I just had to make a turn and it would be straight sidewalk that was about 300 to 400 yards. There are fences on both sides of the sidewalk, so the only solution was to keep running forward. I went at a jog. Right as I turned the corner and made sure that I was out of view from the person, I went on a full-on sprint as quietly as I could. The sidewalk was ahead of me, so I made sure to keep on running. I kept looking behind me to see if I was really being followed. About 70 yards away, I saw a person come into view from the turn, and then sprinted as fast as he could towards me. As if I wasn't sprinting already, I went sprinting as fast as I could. I've never run so fast in my life. Looking back, I'm amazed how fast I ran. Mocha was keeping up with me. About 100 yards of me sprinting, I looked back. The guy was still running behind me. He had a dark hoodie on, sweatpants, and appeared to be 6 feet tall. He was still at the same distance that I noticed him, which means he was pretty fast as well. The sidewalk was going to end at about 100 yards, and it would lead me to a neighborhood. I thought I could lose him there. I was slowly getting out of breath. My adrenaline was beginning to die down. I kept sprinting, hoping I wouldn't get tired too quickly. 100 yards of me sprinting, I finally made it to the neighborhood out of breath. This neighborhood was pretty broad, so if I were to keep running, the person would have spotted me right away, and at the pace he was running, it didn't seem like a good idea. My best solution was to hide. I went straight to a random house and jumped over to the backyard where I would be kept hidden behind the fence. I basically threw Mocha over and myself. We were both panting, but I tried to keep quiet as I heard footsteps coming by. He stopped running, and I heard him panting. I was hearing him mutter as he was out of breath. He kept saying, "What the hell?" I was holding Mocha, scratching her so she wouldn't bark or growl. About 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps walking away and then slowly fading. I waited about 10 minutes in complete silence to be sure he wasn't close by, and then I peeked my head around the fence, and I was all alone now. I got Mocha and went in the opposite direction from where I heard the guy go. Even though I was tired, I tried to jog just so I could get home sooner. I kept looking around me and was very paranoid that the guy would be there somewhere. I made it back home with no problem, and I gotta thank Mocha for pretty much telling me that someone was behind me and stalking us. I don't know how long he was following us for, or what he was planning on doing. I just hope he didn't get a clear glimpse of my face, because I don't want to run into him again. First off, I just wanted to say that this has been going on for years, and we were literally 13 or 14 when stuff started going down. I'm 18 now and have a lot more common sense, or I would like to think so please try and look at this from a 13-year-old's perspective and try not to judge our actions based on this. Also, this gives more context to adults in our lives not believing us. I've ridden horses all my life, but have never kept them close to home. When the opportunity came to keep them 5 minutes down the road from my house, and with my best friend's ponies, I was over the moon. Little did I know what was to take place over the following years. I'll start this with a backstory. The horse I owned at the time came from a rescue that I volunteered at for 5 years. I was sitting down one day, drinking a cup of tea, with the owner of the rescue centre, as we usually did after a hard day of mucking out fields and dragging barrows of hay to the 40 horses and donkeys that lived there, when she told me about a farm that was just down the road from my house, in a little village we'll call Trophy. She said that her father had built that farm, and that he would be turning in his grave if he found out who owns it now. Immediately, I was intrigued, so I pushed for more info. She told me that the man who now owns it, Elliot, who's a pig farmer, he murdered his brother-in-law, who was asking to pay him back $150K in debt, ground him up in a meat grinder, and fed him to the pigs. He then moved those pigs 2 to 3 hours away, for long enough so that when the police eventually tracked them down, the DNA would have been long out of their system. He was actually charged for murder, but ended up being acquitted by the judge due to lack of evidence. What's ironic is that he moved those pigs without a moving permit, which is illegal, and sus as hell, as moving permits are not hard to get hold of. So in the end, he got punished for the illegal transport of livestock, and not for murder. She told me that although he was eventually found not guilty, everyone in the village knew he did it. Now we've got that out of the way, we'll go back to the farm that I'd be keeping my horse at. I had known the owners for a while, as I used to ride one of Annie's horses, my best friend from earlier. Nothing particularly scary had happened while I was riding for her, except once. We had decided to ride down a different trail that day, one that went past an unfamiliar farm. We didn't know who owned it, and weren't sure if they were friendly, so proceeded with caution. All seemed fine, and we were riding through the fields until the path came to a stop. There were gates and guard dogs in the way. We assumed we must have taken a wrong turn, so instead of passing through the gates, we decided to carry on through the fields and around the outskirts of the farm. Unknowingly, we were now trespassing. The horses started to feel extremely uneasy beneath us. Mine would stop and shoot forward. Annie started backing up into the brook that ran alongside us. Annie was hanging off hers, deciding whether to throw herself off before they both ended up in the ditch. When I looked towards the farm, a man was stood completely still, staring at us. I honestly thought he was a scarecrow at first, and had no idea how long he'd been there for. He disappeared after about 30 seconds of making eye contact with me. For some reason, it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was something unsettling about him. A few minutes later, we finally got the horses under control. That's when we heard gunshots behind us. Guns are illegal in my country. Only licensed owners can have them. The only reasonable explanation was that someone was scaring birds off their crops or shooting bunnies, and they hadn't seen us coming. We went into a flat-out gallop, literally crapping ourselves because if they really did not know we were there, we could have been caught by a stray bullet. All the while, we were looking back to see if any birds flew to confirm our theory. They never did. It was meant for us, to warn us to stay away. Later that night, we looked back at the map to see where our wrong turn was. The gates were where the trail carries on, but who in their right mind would go past a bunch of snarling guard dogs? At any point, that man could have redirected us. Shooting towards us was pretty psychopathic. We didn't tell anyone that day, as we thought we'd get into trouble for trespassing. That is only where the problems begin. When I brought Eric to the farm, things calmed down. There were odd scenarios that played out. Sheep were stolen, our ponies were let out, and a white pickup truck would be seen prowling the area often. But again, nothing too serious. This was until October of that year, when we would end up riding in the dark, as days are shorter in the winter. This particular evening, we were goofing around and laughing like 14-year-olds do, when we heard an owl hooting. It was coming from one of the fields that the scary farmer owned. I began imitating it, joking around, and not expecting a reply. It did reply. I found this hilarious, and Annie began joining in. This carried on for about 5 minutes, which in hindsight is definitely a red flag. Any owl would have stopped replying after the first 2 or 3 calls, realizing it wasn't speaking to one of its own. This one always replied, and sounded louder every few calls. The longer this went on, the less owl-like this thing sounded. There was a moment where the noise almost sounded strangled, and that was when Annie turned to me and said, "That is not an owl." We realized that we had just led whoever was in that field right to us. They could now pinpoint exactly where we were. We turned our flashlights off and ducked, trying to be quiet, which is hard when you have a 1,200-pound animal squishing through the mud underneath you. We decided screw it and galloped the rest of the field back to the farm. What we didn't realize was that the weight of the horses had kept deep hoof marks in the soil, leading straight back to us. We were freaking out as we got back, but the adrenaline began to wear off, and we ended up laughing about it while untacking the horses. We were about to lead them to the field when we heard the crunch of broken glass being stepped on from one of the old greenhouses opposite the stables. It was pitch black, except from the dull light coming from behind us. We couldn't see anything. Immediately, we turned all the lights off, picked up the pocket knife that we had used to cut the hay bags open with, and hid behind the stable door. We waited for 10 minutes with no phone signal to call the police, but didn't hear a thing, scared to even breathe in case it made a sound. I decided to be brave and make a dash for the horses, who were tied up outside, thinking I could jump on one if I saw someone and get out of there quicker than they could run. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness now, so I could kind of see into the greenhouse. I shouted back to Annie, "There's no one here, we're just being paranoid." Again, we laughed it off, trying to shake the terror that we had just experienced. It was only till the next day it became very, very real. The next morning was hot, the ground had baked and preserved the hoofprint we left from the previous night. However, there was something else in between them. Massive boot prints leading from the field where we heard the owl, all the way back to our farm. That was where the nickname Farmer Bigfoot came from. We told our parents, however, they decided we were just making drama out of paranoia and didn't believe us. That was that. These boot prints started appearing a lot. We would skate on the ice where the fields flooded over the winter. We would notice the prints a few times, stopping on the edge of the field where we would skate, and then continuing in the opposite direction. We didn't see anyone watching us though. I lost Annie's phone in the fields one night, and we went looking for it in the dark. The next morning, footprints, big footprints. Our trail started getting blocked off. First a huge tree, I'm talking a couple of 100 years worth of trunk and branches, was brought down onto our trail. It was then set on fire after we cut ourselves a path through it. When we weren't being deterred, they seemed to give up until 2018, when huge mounds of rubble started being dumped on our trail. This time, the trail was basically inaccessible. We spoke to a man who lives on the corner who told us he didn't want to name the farmer who was behind all of this, but that we should report it as it's illegally blocking a path. We tried to report it, but the council won't go near him as he's a scary man. He told us that we were being watched and to be careful. Now, this freaked us the hell out, but us being stupid kids stayed from 5 PM till 9 PM, clearing a path through the rubble. We also wrote "screw you" in stones just for effect. The next day there were 3 more piles of rubble and our path was covered over. We were at a loss, so we decided to talk to one of the neighboring farms that keeps horses. Without telling us a name, she said, "You have to be careful messing with him. Around here, he's known as the man who makes people disappear." That's when it clicked. The whole time we had been messing with Elliot, Farmer Bigfoot was Elliot. The same Elliot who fed his brother-in-law to the pigs. No wonder the council wouldn't go near him. Again, we tried to tell our family, but nothing came of it. They thought we were just being dramatic. Things continued happening. Bones were left on top of the rubble piles. Again, I'm guessing to scare us. I have photo evidence for most of this. A whole herd of sheep was stolen, the horses being let out. The owner of our farm would never say who they suspected, but we all knew who it was. The white pickup would turn up almost every week. We started leaving breadcrumbs on our Snapchat stories, thinking if it was weird enough for people to screenshot, we would have multiple witnesses if anything happened to us. We told friends that if we disappeared, make the police look at Elliot. We were terrified. It quietened down after a while, until September last year. We had just ridden, and I was leading both the horses back to the field on my own. It's down a dirt track about a 2-minute walk from the stables. I walked through the wooded area on the track, and immediately, this smell hit me. It was vile, and I knew what it was immediately. Death. Literally rotting flesh. It was enough to make you gag. I put the horses out, and immediately ran back to Annie to come and investigate with me. The farm owner, Ryan, overheard me, and went into the house to grab a flashlight. Annie has a weak stomach, so as soon as the smell hit her, she threw up. It was so strong and so disgusting. Ryan soon joined us and said, "Someone has definitely been in here." This just added to our fear. Annie had recovered from her vomit fiasco and rejoined us in the search. Ryan then said, "I really don't know what we're going to find here, girls, but I don't think it's going to be an animal." Our fear meter was now at the max, but morbid curiosity drove us forward. After an hour of searching, we decided to unstack a pile of wooden pallets. That's when we saw bags of white flesh. They were clear, zip-locked bags. Maggots crawled inside the bags, but there were no holes, implying whatever meat was in there had been rotting for a good while before it was cut up and put into bags. It was the most surreal experience. After more vomit from Annie, we decided to call it a day, reassured that Ryan would now deal with whatever the hell this was. We assumed he would have called the police. We got home, cried to our parents, but again, they dismissed it. Like, how in the hell are we being dramatic when we've just found chunks of rotting flesh in the woods? Anyhow, Ryan is hands down one of the loveliest men on this planet. We always felt safe around him, but what we found out days later was extremely questionable. He did not call the police. He buried the meat. He didn't throw it out. He buried it. What the hell? We assume now it's because he's old, vulnerable. He didn't want to get involved with anything that might put him or his family at risk. I still have no idea why me and Annie didn't phone the police. I'm guessing because we didn't want to cause trouble for Ryan, and no one else believed us, so why would the police? This is where my story concludes. I know, how unsatisfying. I am no longer at that farm, but still have horses. My parents now believe everything I told them, I think because I've kept this up for the past 5 years. In hindsight, they wonder why the hell they didn't move the horses out of there. Annie and I are still best friends and reminisce from time to time about how we were stalked by a murdering farmer for nearly 3 years. We will never know what that meat was, or if Elliot has anything to do with it, nor will we know why he followed us all those years, trying to stop us from riding down our bridle path. I'm not sure I want to know either. So, to the murderer who stalked me and my best friend, let's not meet.